There's lots of amazing early items and upgrades that you really don't want to skip on in God of War Ragnarok, including this really awesome armor that slows down time like how one of the very endgame items did back in 2018. And of course, lots more to talk about in this video. As always, a sub to the channel would mean a lot, and let's jump right in. Now, early on, the game makes a point in teaching you the importance of the new signature Frost Awaken and Flame Whiplash, and I suggest immediately spending your first upgrades on unlocking the heavy follow-up with the R2. At least the Frozen Ascent for the X is one of the best AoEs early on, launching a pretty wide cone of ice damage that lifts enemies up and applies a great amount of frost debuff. And by the way, both the light and the heavy signature follow-ups can interrupt the red attacks of the enemies if you happen to be in the middle of the animation. But I like combining this further with the Glacial Rake, which does something similar to the Frozen Ascent, except you don't need to charge your axe, you just unleash it by pressing and holding the R1. This also throws a wave of frost damage in a pretty decent range, but it's best used as a follow-up to a previous heavier combo to keep the pressure on the enemy and apply even more frost debuffs. For the blade, the Whiplash, unfortunately, it requires a few items and later upgrades until it becomes a lot more useful, which is why early on I prefer focusing on the Hyperion Pool and the Blazing Explosion to juggle enemies and cause massive AoE bursts. Like, it's such a blast to play with it. In this way, you don't even have to worry about enemies trying to evade you while they are suspended up in the air, and you can continuously do these over and over again. Another set of skills which are pretty great and also making a comeback from the previous God of War game are the Permafrost and Immolation, where attacking enemies in a successive way without getting hit would power up your axe and blades with frost or burn damage. And there's also follow-up upgrades this time around that will let you spend that for even stronger attacks later down the line. For the Whirling Storm and Spinning Chaos, not much to talk about here except that they are basically your dodge attack follow-ups, and they will let you more easily close the gap to your next targets after you dodge and then perform an attack. And finally, Vaporize Frost and Extinguish Flames, since we are applying so many of these status effects, and especially if you like switching between weapons often, it's a great way to buff your other weapon, like for example having your axe deal more damage if you previously set the enemy on fire, and also vice versa. Now, for Atreus, there's a few skills I recommend early on, and one of them I recommend immediately getting is the Dive into Battle. This is literally a grapple that you can use with the triangle that launches you towards enemies, and then you can follow up with super strong attacks that apply the currently equipped status damage that you have. I found this to be one of the best combos against enemies with no shields, but if you fight against enemies with shields, then I also recommend the Bludgeoning Strikes. By holding R1, it lets you trip these enemies, making them easy targets from that point on. But moving on to number 2, let's talk about some very strong early on armor options. The first strong set, or at least one of the pieces, is the Nidavellir armor, especially the chest piece, as it lets your grab finishers with the R3 to now heal you every single time. This is super effective while going against large groups of enemies, as it lets you sustain your HP with minimum risks of going down. To get this, you will need some Nidavellir ore, and you get enough of these to craft the whole set from a favor in Svartalfheim called In Service of Asgard. This requires you to shut down a few mining rigs that you can see from the distance, emitting this dark smog, and you also get quite a lot of resources along the way as well. Now, you don't need the whole set, by the way, just one of these platforms will provide 2 ores, which is enough for one of the pieces, in this case the chest, but I recommend going for the whole set, as the remaining 2 other pieces might be helpful at extending the duration enemies stay under the stun effects. There's another reason why you'll want to stay for a bit longer in this realm, and that's because there's 2 more secret items that you can get, including this shield upgrade that gives you rage on parry. So in the same bay area, you will get this tower, which at first features a door that appears to be locked, and that's because you need to open that door with a secret key. Now, to find the key, you have to head over to this island a bit up north, and you're gonna find it in a red loot chest after defeating the enemy that's protecting it. This is also part of a different and much larger side mission called the Weight of Chains, so I suggest following that, going back at the same tower and see what that's all about. But towards the end of this favor, you will get to break the third and final chain, and on your way over there you will get to this area with a legendary chest, which is the one that provides you the Rod of Aggravation for your shield. This is immediately better than your default one that you have at that point. It has a really high luck chance to grant a rage burst when parrying, which is a super useful thing to have when fighting multiple enemies, always parrying, and especially useful against bosses. The other item is called the Pummel of Undying Spark for your Blades of Chaos that can buff burn damage, and it's useful if you go with an elemental build. You get this from the huge crane puzzle just before entering the pit mines, so you have to pay attention to that, turn around on the road that was previously locked, and you have to detonate the barrel so that you can then spin the mechanism and cause the massive crane to bring the platform to you. From here, jump on that platform, freeze the water on the mechanism you previously pulled so that the crane goes back to its original position. Once there, simply jump down, follow the path, and at the end of it you're going to find a legendary chest that gives you said handle. It's probably not the best in the game, but can be useful early on if you really like fire damage. Anyway, we talked about an early chest piece. Well, there's two more items you can use from a different set to complete a very powerful build early on that kinda reminds me of a certain item back in Alfheim in God of War 2018, the one that would basically give you slow down time every time you did a last second evade. So this is the Radiance armor. It does pretty much the same thing. If you kinda like just evade at the last second, you can slow time for, well, 1 to 2 seconds, and it's definitely useful. But you will need to progress all the way up to the end of the story in Alfheim, and at the end of it, choose to remain in the realm and not leave just yet through the Mystic Portal. Because what you can do is head up north in the Barrens up until you see this kind of like moss/skeleton, and then go inside of it. Here you will want to defeat the enemies and then climb up until you see this legendary chest that will give you the Belt of Radiance as part of the armor set. For the second piece, you will need to just head over a bit northwest, so just go forward up until you see this shrine sort of thing or building. There's some enemies inside, including a mini boss. Once you defeat them, there's a golden chest in there that you can open for the Gauntlets of Radiance. And this pretty much means you have a complete Radiance set bonus, which gives you almost 2 seconds of slow time duration instead of just 1, plus the heal on stun grab that you have from the previous armor chest piece, which is like the perfect combination early on if you just get started and want to like move on to tougher challenges or other realms out there and want to have a solid build early on with some really powerful and cool effects. And the slow time is definitely one of the coolest in the game so far, definitely helping you a ton with kind of like adapting to the tougher challenges. And while we're still at it, also in the Barrens, you could probably head over to this cave here in the southeastern part of the map and complete the mini puzzle over there. All you have to do is to align the throw so that when you recall your axe, the final recall also hits the vine to clear the entire area. And once that's done, you will get the Rod of Affliction in case you want to go with even more elemental damage on your build. This one will cause an elemental burst when shield striking enemies afflicted by status effects, which you will want to do anyway since it's the best way to interrupt the blue attacks. Your skills, if you unlock the same one and use the same one as I did, you're going to be able to apply all of these status effects, so it's kind of like all building into itself. Now, if you did pre-order and even more so got the deluxe edition of God of War Ragnarok, then you can also redeem the bonus craftable armors, which you should get by the time you hit Svartalfheim by simply interacting with the blue chest of lost loot that you find over at Sindri. So the first set is Darkdale. The chest piece lets you restore HP and rage when defeating enemies while in the Spartan Rage. Meanwhile, the Waste and the Gauntlets increase rage gain when attacking status-afflicted enemies with runic attacks, which is oddly specific and quite situational, so not really the best option. The reason Snow set is a bit better: when launching enemies up, it has a high chance to give you a strength and stagger resistance boost, so you will see that pop up way more often. Meanwhile, the Waste and the Gauntlets of this set will increase the stun that you deal to airborne enemies, so it's a pretty great all-around armor to have early on and maybe even a bit later. But this is pretty much it with the video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.